Many of the people who locally talk about rights have deep political agendas, which we often don't understand very well. Again, let me give a little example from Burundi. For example, this is a funny one. There is a Conseil National de Bashingantahe out there, a national council of old, wise, traditional power holders, supposedly. And this is neat stuff. Old wise men do conflict resolution. They were men, I'm sorry. They do conflict resolution type of stuff. They do, which is on the border of justice, potentially rights even, and on the border clearly of conflict resolution and so on as well. And we like that sort of stuff. So a national council gets created. Some lady at UNDP with $1 million to give away gives that $1 million away to the leader of that national council. But of course, if you start looking more closely, very often you see that such agencies, who, by the way, write beautiful reports, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, highly critical of the government, pointing out very correctly rights abuses by the government. But this is a very, very deeply political affair. This particular man has a major political agenda, has a long-standing opposition to this government, had long-standing deep relations to the previous governments, now discredited and out of power, and so on. And so we outsiders, in our desire to hook up with local forces for change and dynamics, and even in this case, something traditional, which is even more progressive, of course, isn't it? Even more beautiful. We get stuck in very, very nasty little games often that we don't realize. To us, it's a beautiful terminology, right? Often to other people, it's a tool in a political battle, which is logical. But it doesn't make it any easier, of course, to talk about rights or to work on rights. Yeah, the human rights approach is de facto very state-oriented, right? Certainly, human rights as a sort of legal edifice and a scholarly field is extremely legally oriented and extremely state-oriented, right? The state is the locus where rights ought to be guaranteed, right? The state is in charge of legislating and organizing. But evidently, in a post-conflict situation, it is a very partial look right away. I.e., the violation of a right may occur somewhere and may not be the state. It may indeed be, say, men to women or parents to children. But the duty bearer in international law and in human rights law is the state. It is up to the state to create the legal or other conditions to eradicate this particular violation. And this makes entire sense from a legal perspective. But I do not think that it is a perfect solution from a perspective of where you sit, most of you, as development practitioners. I think that there are many things within society that one can do and partners to work with and so on, and that an exclusive focus only on it's the state's job, because it is the duty bearer, to solve rights violation is a mistake. In post-conflict situations where clearly there is very violent tensions often still alive underneath between the state and at least part of the opposition and society, that is not a very helpful situation. That is clearly something that has been happening in Rwanda, for example, where many of us got stuck into anti-state attitude and we got stuck in it, we got tied up in it. I remember people telling me when I would go there, Peter, the only civil society in Rwanda is, and then they would name 3 names or 3 organizations, and the only thing those 3 had in common is that they were radically opposed to the government. But wait a minute, is that the only thing that makes you a civil society, to be radically opposed to the government? But we got stuck into that because as a rights-based person, we see violations in the state only, and hence those who are opposed to the state and point out very loudly those violations become our preferred partners very often. But evidently that is a big mistake to make. And it will hurt you, as it did in Rwanda, where everybody failed with that strategy. So those are some of the difficulties, I think, of doing a rights-based work in a post-conflict context. Clearly there are many of them, which makes one wonder, is it überhaupt possible to do this? And I think it is possible, but I also think I ran out of time. So I think some of these issues may well come up later in the conversation. And first, let's see if there are any questions. Do we still have time for questions?
I think the key question is related with the capacity of the government. The main issue is that a government may have a limited capacity to deliver. And sometimes in a situation of conflict, if you do the capacity of building of government or work with the government, then this question of providing legitimacy to many of the authoritarian governments may arise there. So there is a dilemma here. whether you provide some assistance to a government which politically can be seen as legitimizing the regime. And if you don't do that, then the poor people in the communities may not be getting anything. I think that's one dilemma. The second is clearly seeing the difference between the right-based approach and need-based approach. I think the same things, many of the things can be done in either ways. I think the key difference will be that if we do the need-based approach, sometimes we may be reinforcing the existing power relationships there. I think the right-based comes there when we do something, we try to fulfill the needs, but as well as try to change the existing power relations. Thank you.
What we state to be the aim of post-conflict situations reconstruction, usually we say it's a return to normalcy. But what was normalcy? And that's the issue for me. What was normalcy just before the conflict? Normalcy was also a situation where rights were being abused. Normalcy was a situation where power relations encouraged the exclusion of others. And so we return to normalcy, therefore return to a foundation for a new conflict or a new crisis. And I ask myself that, and then when you pose the question of power, oftentimes we change the face of power without changing the nature of power. So it may be new people, new regimes, new old rebels, but the nature of power remains the same. And because the nature of power is oppressive and exclusionary, it continues to perpetrate the causes of conflict.
Oh man, there are so many good points. But there was something on, oh yeah, the issue of tools, yeah. Another question about tools. Recently I evaluated a project in Burundi that was working in the field of conflict transformation. And this organization was really doing a very, very interesting job in this particular case. Hard to measure, as we all know, a whole other field of difficulty. How do we überhaupt measure this impact? But still, having spent weeks and weeks on it, I really did feel that these folks were making a difference. They had nothing in the way of tools. Not one single one. Not one single one. They did nothing. They just did stuff, you know, and that was it. And so they did a great job, however. And my colleague and myself, at the end, we're going for the standard technocratic recommendation. They ought to develop tools to, but suddenly you say, wait a minute, but why? If they're doing it right already, why the hell do they need tools? Right? Maybe indeed they have institutionalized it to such an extent in their minds that it has become who they are. They do it normally. They are just conflict-sensitive people. The ultimate thing is not to have a tool, it's just to be good at what you do. And so I had to really take it out of the report again. They don't need tools, they do it already well, right? So tools are always a risk, but they are also sometimes necessary. But they are certainly not a product, they are at best well, literally a tool.